Hey everybody, Ed Carbajal here with Matt Hawkins, Coast to Coast Combat Hour, brought to you by AllAccessMMA.com. Make sure you check out All Access MMA for your mixed martial arts news. This week we hit the trifecta, the living death trifecta, as we're joined by homeboy Ant Walker from I've known Ant from Sure Dog. We met working together at Sure Dog from our time there, and now you do the Living Death podcast that's stealing Matt from this show. What's up, Matt? What's up, Ant?
What's going on, Ed? What's up, man? I'm happy to be here. It's been a long time coming to get me on this show. We've had all sorts of scheduling issues for like 2 years at least. So I'm very happy we finally get it done. The trio, me, Ben, and Jay, have been here now. Both of you guys have been on my show. Both of you guys will be back on plenty more times, and we'll just keep it rolling.
Cool. Well, your show is a real, you got everything scheduled and you're real organized. We kind of just freestyle it a little bit here. And when we have guests on, we like to kind of use the opportunity to give them the outlet to talk about what they do, how they got into the sport, and just kind of let our listeners get to know you personally so that they can, get to know you when they want to listen to your podcast. So I guess my first question that I generally ask would be, what got you started in MMA? Age wise, how did you get into it? Were you into boxing prior? Just what was your general feel that got you going in the fight world?
To make an extremely long story short enough for a digestible bit on a podcast, my my foray into like combat sports actually came through pro wrestling, but it was more so my disappointment when I found out it wasn't real. And my family, especially the dad side of the family, are boxers and into boxing and stuff. So that's like a family tradition. Everybody is trained at a boxing gym at some point, and everyone watched boxing. So I grew up watching Pernell Whitaker and Roy Jones and everybody like that. But I remember watching pro wrestling as a kid and thinking it was the best thing ever. And I thought the Ultimate Warrior was just like a superhero, and the Undertaker and everybody. I was obsessed. And then when I found out that it was scripted combat, they weren't actually fighting. I think I was like 8 or 9 or something. I was so devastated that I finally decided to look at boxing with a closer eye. And that's how that began. Then that turned into me liking Bruce Lee movies and Kung Fu flicks and everything. And when MMA came out, I was hooked. So, of course, for everybody, that moment you all remember is the Tough finale. And that's probably the moment where it was like, yeah, I'm certified like an official diehard fan of this now. Before then, I watched MMA and enjoyed it, but not like I did after that point.
Yeah, I think that was like a turning point for a lot of people. I mean, that's how you got into the sport, but like just to kind of piggyback off of Matt's question, what made you want to do the media side of things? I mean, I personally, I don't know if I think I told the story on your podcast. I know I fell into it by accident, but like, what made you like? Because I mean, a lot of folks like to throw the word journalist around in the MMA media space. I'm not one of them, but when I think about folks that do a good job of when they do write and cover the sport, you're one of the ones that come to mind. You ask the right questions.
Well, thank you.
When you get to especially when you get the opportunities to ask the right questions, like you did, you and Matt were in boots on the ground at Bellator 290. So like, what made you want to do that much more, getting involved with the sport?
Much like you, I kind of fell into it. So the first step was me training. Like I was thinking about trying to take a fight, and I'm training hard, and I'm like, I set up a new schedule for my job and for everything. I was like, all right, I'm gonna make sure I'm training twice a day. I'm gonna be ready by this date. I'm gonna take a fight. End up breaking my leg about a week into my new schedule. And so was that. But I miss like training. I miss like martial arts in general. So I started writing for Bleacher Report just to pass time. It was before Bleacher Report came like a legitimate outlet and anybody could write for them. So I was one of the anybody's. And I did a few articles, and then once I started working again, my schedule just made it hard to take the time to write, and wasn't getting paid anyway, so I didn't really care a whole lot. Fast forward to some years later, I moved to California. I was really just like lonely, and I wanted someone to talk about fights with. A buddy that I just met. We like fights and we'd like to talk about them. So I said, hey, let's start a podcast. We started the podcast and it caught the attention of Sherdog Radio, and that's how I ended up there. So when the radio network in its original inception was defunded, that's when I made the switch to writing and reporting.
I've stated on the show that I do media because I do this podcast, but I'm in this for the fan side, and I have some writing I'm really proud of, but I don't really consider myself a writer. I'm not. It's hard for me to do. It's hard for me to put my words on paper. I don't have the college background of writing like Ed does. And did you have any of that, or was it something where one day you just started scribbling on paper and you just took well to it?
A little bit of both, actually. I've always enjoyed writing. I've always liked creativity. So as a kid, I used to write short stories. Like when I was 7, I wrote a sequel to Gremlins, which still I say is the shit. Like I gotta find it. So I think my grandmother has it somewhere stashed up. But like I used to write stuff just for fun. And used to make my own comic books and all that as a kid. So being creative was always something that I had in mind. I did music. I was a rapper and everything. So writing was just normal.
Mhm.
But I went to college. I didn't finish my degree, but I went to college for journalism.
Mm.
So I did get some training in reporting, and I wrote for the Howard University student paper for a little bit. And and then once the radio thing with Sherdog sort of dried up in that form, I was like, well, I do like this stuff. I want to stay involved. Like, so can I write? And Mike Fridley let me, and then I just kept writing. And then I realized, oh, actually, I'm okay at this. But then it was also, I had this horrible imposter syndrome. So
Mm.
when I originally used to just do an op-ed a week, I would obsess over what am I going to write about. Like I'd write something and I'd be like this sigh of relief, and I'm like, I'm proud of what I did. I turn it in, and then it gets published, and I get some decent reception off of it. And I always think, I don't think I could do that again. And I would do this every week, like torture myself with this every week. And then finally, my wife was just like, just shut up.
Yeah.
And I shut up and I kept writing. So
Yeah, that's crazy because I didn't even know that about you. So, because I mean, it doesn't seem like that would be the case. I mean, I know. You've left me with a couple of mic drop moments when we spoke in real time that kind of helped me kind of steer myself in away from getting imposter syndrome and anything, just because talking about just focusing on what you enjoy doing in your own life more than the business itself. Because as we've seen the state of MMA media now, it's a little funny out there. But well, before
yes.
we're gonna get into that in a minute. But one of the things, because I didn't know you had been doing podcasting from that far back, that long, with the Sherdog Radio days. Like you said, the original inception of it. So I remember. Again, I'm getting over COVID, so my mind's not all there. I forgot because I know I was on the podcast the first time under the name that you used to call it, and now it's called the Living Death Show. But what was it called before? Because I don't remember. And where did you get the current name from?
So it was, I would say it went through a few versions without revealing too much behind the curtain. Like it's something that me and you can talk about, off the record.
Yeah.
It was originally called Off the Chain, and it was just a play on the dog logo for Sherdog.
Yeah.
Then that lasted on Sherdog for like a couple months, if that. And without that, we'll talk later about how. But then so then things, we like, okay, we're going to move this over to my YouTube channel, the Walkout Network, and that's when we called it Unleashed, once again sort of playing off of that. And after a while, like we got comfortable with that. Like we made all the graphics and all that stuff, and we were comfortable with it, and it's fun. It was a fun show to do, and it's something that that I look forward to every week. But then we got to a point where like, well, this name kind of sucks. And this is a long time of us doing this. At this point, we're like, wow, this name really sucks, and like that's just such a typical name for MMA. Let's do something a little better than that. And we brainstormed a few ideas, and then it became the Living Death Show, and that was because of the Tito and Ken Shamrock press conference when he told Tito he was going to beat him into a living death. So,
I don't know why I didn't know that, but that's
and I wish I wish I knew that you were going to ask me that question, right? Because there was one name that I really liked. I don't know if it was me or Jay that came up with that name, but it was horribly, horribly sexually graphic, and it was fantastic. And that's the name I wanted. But then they were like, "Come on, fam! Like, I know how you are, but let's chill." So I was like, "All right, we'll chill." But that name, I wish I could share it with you right now because I just don't remember it. But I'll dig it up and then I'll share it with you at some point.
Yeah, you had me on the first time. It was still Unleashed. That's why I couldn't remember Unleashed.
Oh yeah,
but yeah.
I love the name of your show, obviously based off of the UFC 40 pre-fight press conference. But then just recently, I mean, I don't know if you even talked about it much on your show. Jay Petrie had reached out to Kaposa, Grabaka Hitman, on Twitter about trying to track down who was this mystery corner man for Ken Shamrock in all of his fights, and Kaposa reached out to me, knowing my background in the sport, behind the scenes. So we spent like a whole day basically just investigating. I mean, I went through stuff. I found people that had the same name as his brother who looked just like the guy but wasn't him. And then when it broke it down, it turned out it was his doctor and his anesthesiologist. So it really and that's what I pointed out to Kaposa and Jay. I said, well, when he said I'm going to beat you into a living death, he actually had a corner man that did that essentially for a living.
Like
so
he was speaking in medical terms, I guess. Like that's actually hilarious.
Of all the things that he could have been, for it to be that, with that saying that not only was the name of your podcast, but was kind of a running joke for a decade on MMA forums. It was just outstanding. So what if you had to pick one thing in media, writing, podcasting, covering live events, what's your favorite aspect, or is that even too hard of a question to ask?
It's a hard question to ask, but I'm glad you asked it because I question that myself a lot of times. So I essentially have kind of taken whatever opportunities present themselves to me. Right now, opportunities aren't plentiful in this space, at least opportunities that will help you pay the bills. So I'm kind of taking what I can get at the moment. However, if I had to pick, I like being in front of the mic. I like just talking and saying things out like that because it allows for a lot more leeway. I think when you write something, you're gonna go really in depth. At least I like to investigate a lot. So I'm digging through all sorts of research. Like when I'm writing those MMA on point scripts that I do now, I mean, I'm doing a ton of research into every little line and even if it's just like a little sliver of information and I can turn into a sarcastic joke, I'll take it. Like I'll take whatever I can find. But talking about it is a lot different because I think when you're talking it's like this real-time development of the thought. It's this real-time development of your opinion. And then when you talk to like-minded people, I'm talking to you guys, and plenty of times that we've done podcasts together, and you guys will say something that like, oh, I didn't think about it that way. And then that changes the whole way I go about it. Like writing in and of itself is such a it's such a solo journey. Very similar to martial arts in a way. Like you're the only one who's going to step on the mat and do what you got to do. You're the only one putting in the bag work and everything else to progress. And writing feels like that a lot. But I like the collaboration of talking in a mic and to people and getting feedback and everyone just trying to understand one another, and we come to a deeper understanding because we're looking at these other perspectives. That's really what I enjoy. I'd love live coverage too, depending on how the media is set up for it. If we have good enough access to the athletes and you can ask questions that make sense and add something to the discussion, I love it. But talking about it with people who know what they're talking about, that's number one for me, I'd say.
There is like a difference too when you talk about it, like me talking about it with you guys versus talking about it to some Joe Schmo, on the day to day that only knows about Conor McGregor and who else is out there that's like that?
What's Ronda Rousey up to? Like one of those.
yeah. I mean, just those people that I'm just kind of like, okay, like they those are the guys. It's funny the sponsor of this show, All Access MMA, Jacob De Leon. he came up with this term for like UFC fans versus MMA fans. He called them the UFC stands. And that stuck with me because when he said that, I was like, "Yeah, man, it's almost, Matt said Zuffa Zombie on last week's podcast, and I was just like, you know what? I mean, even the Zuffa, because if you talk about the Zuffa era, those are still better MMA fans than like in the current landscape of MMA. So this is leading me into what I kind of just touched on before, like the current state of the business as a whole, media, the sport, where do you what do you think about it, and like where do you see it going? Is it positive, negative?
I mean, on the media side, it doesn't look too good. It looks pretty bad. I mean, the good thing is this stuff usually goes in cycles. So there will be an upswing at some point as far as media is concerned, where opportunities might open up for people. We'll have like new minds coming in, adding new wrinkles to the dialect like that. That's going to happen. But right now it kind of sucks. Like I think it more so has to do with the UFC running the schedule that it's running, when it's the dominant force in conversation, not because it's the best league out there or it has all the best talent. It's because they just run so many events you can't really think of anything else. And then their broadcast partner is ESPN, like the name in sports media. So when you have two conglomerates like that combining with like Disney backing them and stuff, it's next to impossible when they are dominating so much of the media space for independent players to get in, unless of course they have the access and they're on friendly terms and certain things don't get talked about and whatnot, which why we see like Bloody Elbow getting dropped by Vox, like such a shattering thing, because that was like the one major outlet that was really just given the free run
right
to just
questions,
to do what was necessary to do the sort of things that are going on in other sports. Because you can't get away with so much in the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball without it turning into a scandal. You just can't. But the UFC or mixed martial arts in general just isn't at that point to where it's taken seriously enough to where the journalism gets serious overall too. It's still sort of dominated by fandom, but it's drawing in money of a real sport. It's a very strange place, but it's kind of taken all the bad elements of each part to combine it into what it is today.
Do you know if there's I've heard rumors about certain like you need a certain amount of followers or you need this or that to get UFC credentials. Do you know of any actual guidelines in order to get credentialed for that you've heard of, or do you just have
No.
to? Is it just know somebody or have
like,
a big
I honestly, I couldn't tell you, because I was fortunate to be working at SureDog and going to live events at a time where SureDog wasn't banned. So I was, I had SureDog on my credentials. So they say, okay, approve Ant Walker. And, and I was there at events. From what I understand, there is some give and take with the PR team at the UFC. The current PR team I'm not familiar with. I only remember it's been 3 years or so, 3.5 years since I've been at a UFC event.
Yeah.
So I can't tell you who all the PR people are now, but then I know there were certain loops that you had to go through as far as the outlet being approved. I'm sure that has something to do with the amount of followers. I'm sure it has something to do with the type of content. But then now we're seeing where like the UFC is allowing like a Barstool Sports or some other guys, I can't remember their names, that like do goofy stuff, and they're now
they're just there. Yeah, they're just there. They're just there with cameras. Yeah.
So but those guys function more as PR, right? Because they're not asking any worthwhile questions. They're not contributing anything other than hyping up the event. So they become more of an extended PR team, and I think that's sort of where the exceptions lies. If you are an extended PR team, probably you get a pass. At UFC 229, which I was fortunate enough to cover, there were a lot of real media people, like real dedicated mixed martial arts journalists and reporters and professionals and personalities or whatever you want to call everybody that were sitting in the media room while everything was going on, but like Home and Garden Network and Bloomingdale's or whoever the hell, like these outlets that had literally nothing to do with martial arts or combat sports and or sports in general were there and were taking prime positioning inside the arena. Like that happens. I wish there was a science to it. I wish I could explain it. I do know that through my work at MMA On Point, I know that outlet is credentialed, but since the pandemic started, they haven't been sending people to events like that. It actually blew my shot because I was going to be the West Coast guy for that. So that thanks, COVID. But yeah, I do know, talking to the guys that run MMA On Point, like there was some back and forth about how the outlet would get credentialed and what was expected of them in a particular way, not necessarily, combing through their content, but you couldn't just be some jackass off the street, essentially, unless you're Barstool.
or you got a funny name.
Yeah, you got the funny name, whoever they are. The funny name people.
Yeah. It's definitely a funny time to just Nolan King is a friend of mine, and he's come through the trenches himself to make his way to MMA Junkie, and every time we cover an event, we're together. We still hang out like it was the old days back when we were when he was still kind of like not signed with anybody or whatever, and we talk about a lot of stuff, and that was something that he and I brought up recently, is just like it's like you have to have a gimmick now to cover the sport. And then and some of these people just seem to get it overnight if they're goofy enough or funny enough, or they're talking about blowing fighters or whatever the hell the gimmick is. You know what I mean? Like there's always something weird and goofy, and then the next thing you know, they're sitting on a couch with the $100 podcast mics talking to fighters and Dana White and stuff like that. And it's like, where did you come from? Like you weren't even watching all the stuff we talked about that got you into MMA. You probably don't even know about it, and here you are front and center to give the company more exposure. So it's just Matt and I talk about it a lot on this podcast, but it's just crazy times. It looks like the fandom is just going it's going in a weird space, which is kind of why I cover the UFC least of all than everything else that I do my coverage for. To your point about like talking about being able to pay bills, I think that's the best way. If you want to make any real money doing it, you have to kind of do what everyone else is not doing. I mean, that works for me, but it's also more enjoyable for me too. And Matt and I've talked about this a lot before. So,
but and mentioning that the UFC is the most popular, not necessarily because of the product, but because of the amount of output, that changes the news cycle on this stuff. Like when you go back, even you go back 10 years, which sounds like a lifetime to some of these kids doing it nowadays. But back then, like you had like a month to marinate on an event, like you could write an article 2 weeks after an event and it was still relevant to the news cycle. Whereas now, like, that's where I'm like, I try to write something and I go, well, it's going to take me 3 days to put something together. By that time, we're already going to be talking about next weekend's event. Nobody wants to talk about Aaron Pico's fight last week. It's already passed, and so that, and I think that also opens the doors for these people that don't have the history in the sport, because the news cycle's so quick that as long as they're able to punch out, something, they can and stay on top of the news cycle, then they're able to keep up with the TikTok generation and and just kicking stuff out. I do have a question. Go ahead. Jump
in. Sorry, Matt. Like you're kind of opening up doors in my mind here, because it's sort of, I think it's a symptom of the way society is in general. Like I think about like album reviews, like music is kind of followed the same sort of trend. I don't know if you guys, Matt, you don't strike me as a big hip hop guy.
I actually more than you, Matt. All I listen to, but it's
really?
all 396. Oh, I'm listening to Mount West for right now.
Man, we got to talk some more, man.
Dude, I've seen Ice-T in concert, Cypress Hill.
Oh my god,
Snoop, Bone Thugs, Dog Pound, Warren G.
Oh, we
Yeah,
gonna talk. We
I'm
gonna talk.
West Coast, but yeah, no,
Okay. Hey,
I was listening to Nothing But a G thing on the basketball court when I was 11. I was
so
in NWA when I was 10.
So Ed, I know, and I know you into some hip hop. So
Oh yeah.
we've talked about that before, at least a little bit. So I know you're familiar with a lot of hip hop. Now, you guys remember what the Source magazine was like?
Oh
How
yeah.
big of a deal that was? Like that was it. I mean, they call it the Bible of hip hop for a reason.
Hmm.
You know, you got that Source magazine. It takes what, like a month and a half, 2 months for a magazine to start from inception to print on your newsstand, and you at home reading it. Takes about like a 2 month process to get all that together. And in that time, they've got the album reviews for the album that just dropped last week.
Hmm.
So they were able to sit with it. Like the people who wrote those reviews, they sat with that thing for a couple weeks at least, and they
Hmm.
listened to it and over and over and over again and really digested it. And that led to more thoughtful insight on what the music was saying, or what direction the artist was headed, et cetera, et cetera. And that has now been destroyed with like albums dropping, so many albums dropping every week. They put out a review that they put the review out like an hour after the thing drops. You barely got to hear it. So
Yeah.
you have no real long standing insight into what's being talked about, and you got a review
Yeah.
out, and now we're on to the next one, and that's what the UFC feels like right now. Like, I want to sit with some of this stuff. I want to sit and digest it, especially from a technical standpoint, to see all the intricacies and what they do technique wise. Oh, my daughter just came in. Hey, baby. Hey, baby. So like technique wise, like I want to look at something and really like look at it and over again and
Yeah.
analyze it. But there's no time for that unless you're getting paid to do it. Unless you're making a living, there's no time to sit there and really digest things. And that
Yeah.
makes it harder to appreciate stuff in the sport if you don't have the moments to digest and the moments to reflect on what it is.
Yeah. I agree. It's too fast now. I mean, the technology, it's a blessing and a curse, but talking about being able to watch things and digest one fight that I've had to rewatch, and I talk about it with my jiu-jitsu students and stuff last night. UFC 284. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about the pound for pound. They're still talking about it now. So when you know this pound for pound thing and the IV situation and the whole everything involved with the main event of UFC 284. What was just give us your, I'm sure you talked about it in depth on your podcast. I know you record on Mondays, right? So what was your take on UFC 284? Just if you want to chime in
Um,
on
let's see. So a couple of angles that we could tackle on this, as far
Mhm.
as the pound for pound debate. Well, actually, let's start simple first. How'd
Mhm.
you score the fight? I scored it 3 rounds for Volkanovski, 2 rounds for Makachev. I gave, if I'm remembering correctly, I gave Volkanovski 1, 3, and 5, I believe. And yeah, I definitely gave him 1 because I think he was in control of 1 for a pretty long period of time until like the last minute, maybe. I
Mhm.
think it turned against him. So I weighed that round for Volkanovski. Yeah, 3 and 5, and I thought 5 was the most definitive round out of them all.
Mhm.
And yeah, what were you guys' scores?
I had it 3-2 Islam. I had him 1, 2, and 4. With Volkanovski winning 3 and 5. Um, that's how I had it.
Hmm. I didn't really score like that. Um, but when I remember the fight, I don't disagree with the decision, except outside of that 49-46. I don't know where the hell that came from. But the thing that the reason why I understand why I went where it went is because the times that Volkanovski was comfortable with Islam on his back and joking around and throwing punches this way. I mean, yeah, you're hitting him, but you're still being, your back is still being controlled by Islam. I know he recovered from the takedowns, but they still happened. Which, by the way, the takedown, I have it in my notes because I wanted to mention it on the podcast. Volkanovski and Koji Takada, and now from the Rising Show New Year's Eve, those are the 2 recent MMA fighters that I can think of that handled Dagestani style wrestling better than anyone I've ever seen. and they both lost their fights respectively. But their opponents were both they visibly damaged, even though they won. They both wore a lot of damage, and they both seemed more tired. Even though they won the fight, they still seem more tired than the guys that they just beat. With again, they both got takedowns. I forget the guy from Rizin's name, Khabib's guy that's competed in that first fight on the main card, that beat Takada. But even after that, Khabib went up to Takada and congratulated him on how well he did, because he was able to reverse it. He was reverse or counter Dagestani style wrestling. And then Volkanovski, like, I had to eat crow on this one, because I was critical of Volkanovski training with Craig Jones for that type of wrestling, and it wound up working out by allowing the takedown, just doing the elevator hook same side to stop the mount, and then getting back to your feet, which and on top of his athleticism and strength and stuff like that. So I didn't disagree with the decision. That's where I stand with the fight, but I had to mention that too, because that's the thing that I remember the most.
Yeah, it was a fight where you can very easily look at it for either guy, and I don't think it was a robbery by any stretch of the imagination. I saw, of course, anytime there's a close fight in MMA, like the Twitter just explodes with robberies all over the timeline, and like, I'm not trying to hear that. That was a close fight, and the best thing about it is that they both did exactly what they tried to do. They both were very successful in their game plans. Like, Volkanovski was doing a fantastic job of hitting the body, of being all the way in or all the way out for the striking. He was faster, and the hand speed was definitely a factor. Makachev was able to, like, slow Volkanovski with like some well-placed counters, was able to get the fight to the ground at times, and stall against the fence. Like, they did essentially what they both sought out to do. And it's very easy to see it for one guy or the other. There's no robbery involved. It was just a close fight, and so it kind of matters on what you value more. And I think especially when you start talking to people who train like you, like myself, and like you, Matt, like, what did you train in? Like, what sort of things do you favor just by your nature? I know you're a BJJ guy, so of course a lot of the grappling stuff is going to weigh heavier to you. You understand it better, and my background is primarily in striking, so that just makes more sense to me. And I think that's really all it is. Now, I do think, though, the pound for pound discussion is where we really open the floodgates for some interesting discourse. That's where it really your mind starts unraveling. It's like, you're trying to think of that meme where the woman's looking all confused, and it's like the math puzzles and stuff are just flying by her head. That's exactly what it feels like when you think of the pound for pound discussion with this fight. So I'm gonna ask you fellas, who is the number one pound for pound fighter in the world?
In the whole sport, or just the UFC?
Well, I'll say this, ignoring the fact that this conversation will be totally irrelevant when John Jones steps into the ring in a couple weeks.
I mean, based off of, I just think pound for pound so stupid. Yeah. Like, and my biggest beef with this, without kind of dodging that question, because it kind of goes against, like, I guess I would say Volkanovski, but like at the same time, like, I feel like he kind of put that on the line in this fight, and you still lost. So, like, my beef isn't necessarily with the voters that put him number one. My beef is that he kind of, like, I don't want to be disrespectful, but, like, I don't like his attitude. It would have been so much cooler if he was like, dude, I lost. I went in there, I challenged him for the number one pound for pound, and he beat me. Whether I agree with the judges or not is irrelevant. He got his hand raised. We're going to do this again down the line, and I'll win back that title. So for him to kind of be dodging it the last couple days and change it, like, I don't see any upside to Islam taking a rematch. Like, he has to finish him or beat the hell out of him in order for him to go up in any value. And, like, if Cejudo moves up to 145 and fights Volkanovski now, can he lose 4 rounds to 1 but still be the number one pound for pound? Because he's in theory coming up 20 pounds if you go back to him being 125. You know what I mean? So, like, it just it gets all screwy. Like, I think it's moved on beyond the fun. It was always kind of a fun ranking. Like it was, and for history, it was always Anderson Silva or Fedor or George St. Pierre, and then it
Yeah.
became John Jones. But like, I mean, Ngannou being
Ah,
ranked high, like, are we gonna act like if Ngannou weighed 145 pounds, he'd have any chance? Like, I mean, like the transition of skills and stuff. So it's really a weird. It's so weird. So I guess to answer your question, I would say Volkanovski, but I also might say Pitbull. You know, like
mm,
so like based off the fact that he hasn't lost. I mean, he lost to McKee, but he avenged that loss. He didn't go crying. And again, I don't mean to be disrespectful to Volkanovski, but to me,
mm,
Pitbull did the right thing. He went back, had his rematch, won his rematch. Again, questionable decision, but he won his rematch, got his slot
mhm.
back, and he's basically number one pound for pound in Bellator. And
Yeah.
probably 3 to 5 if you're looking at the worldwide MMA rankings, at least in my world.
So that's why I don't. It's funny that you're posing the question to us like that because like Matt just mentioned Bellator's ranking. They just started their ranking. Their ranking is relatively new. I'm already finding it a little goofy with some of the movement that's been there lately. Um, but I've never like thought about overall in the whole sport who I think is a pound for pound best fighter because it's hard to say because there's so many good fighters out there. Like you asked me who my favorite fighter is in the entire sport, I can tell you that.
Mhm.
Um, but then I can tell you who my favorite striker is and who my favorite up and comer is. You know, there's so many guys out there and ladies that I think are fantastic fighters. But overall, I mean, that's a hard question to answer for me. So I can't just say one name because it's hard for me to think of one. But as far as the rankings are concerned over at the UFC, I don't disagree with their pound for pound not taking on any or at least leaving Volkanovski at number one. Um, which I just looked it up because one of the guys that I trained with last night tried to tell me that they had, and mind you, he's a Dagestani fellow, so of course he saw something different than what I'm looking at now. I'm gonna bring it up on screen just in case I know that some of the guys I trained with watch this.
Does he have the same barber as all the other
Yes, he
Dagestani fighters?
does. Yes, he
Okay.
does.
That guy's very rich, by the way. That barber is living it up.
But I'm bringing up this is Wednesday night, the day after the class, Aiden, that Alexander Volkanovski alone shows as the men's pound for pound top ranked fighter on the UFC official UFC rankings. So I don't disagree with that because the thing about like I mentioned why I agree with the decision and why I agree with him staying where he is because he's still like the thing I said about the wrestling, but he also like I mean you know it's weird to watch a guy win a fight and look as stressed as Makachev looked by the time it was over. I mean, there's already memes and everything on the internet of him looking at the clock and and Volkanovski. I just saw a clip of him yesterday. The fucking guy went out dancing after fighting 5 rounds against Islam Makachev. So I'm like, okay, he's definitely a different type of human because he can do that. So I agree with how the rankings turned out. It's weird though because when the folks that do rankings, when you look at who does the rankings, I often like, and we talked about me and Matt talked about this on the podcast in the past, but like I'm like I always wonder, did you even watch half of the fights that made a decision on these people's careers? So that's why I always liked when Israel Adesanya, when he found out that it was media folk that voted on the rankings, he had a really cool reaction that he was like, "What?" He's like, "And then how many of you all fight?" He asked everyone in the room, and he was just kind of like really puzzled. So that's one classic moment that sticks out from
Yeah,
his.
only Oscar and Casey raised their hands, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's not a lot of people, but because I mean, but not everyone has to. Like Matt doesn't train, like the way that I do or the way that you do, but he definitely has an eye for the sport because Matt goes running. Matt's one of the few guys I know that'll still go running to watch fights in the dog park. Like they chill
Mhm.
into if they're still going on. Matt would rather run to that than to the UFC event just because
Yeah,
that's
I'm an
how he
old
is.
school. I
Yeah.
trained in the 90s and early 2000s. I was in the no holds barred, you know, got my ass kicked in high school and knocked on a door of a UFC fighter, his, kind of story. So like,
Mhm.
and then life changed. I
Mm.
wasn't able to pursue that dream. Life changed, my family, everything changed. So but it allowed me still to go to events and really be a part of it and
Yeah.
help sponsor events and
Yeah.
be a part of it. So I've
But you
had an
still
eye
have
on
an
the
eye
sport.
for it. Yeah, you
I've
still
had an
have an
eye
eye
on the
for it.
sport
Yeah.
since the day it started, and I've been as close to it as you can be without actually fighting or being, Jeff Sherwood, or you
Mhm.
know what I mean, like the guys who created the media and get into it. So that's why I love to get out to events, because it's my outlet to be able to be a part of the sport
Mhm.
without, and I boxed a couple years ago. I mean, I jump into it when I can, but man, you get old, it's hard to recover.
Yeah, that's very, very true.
Who,
I know that
who
feeling,
you
man.
telling?
Yeah. But you know what? I think, Matt, you hit it perfectly, and really, Ed, you too, because you're both thinking the same way I was thinking about this. Because when we do rankings, if two guys have fought head to head and one
Mhm.
of them loses, conventional wisdom says, okay, well, that guy isn't better than the one who beat him. That's pretty obvious. We've had this right now. We have this situation right now in the pound for pound, but the guy who lost is ahead. So that's already kind of wacky. But then the pound for pound is supposed to be, if they were the same size. Well, they weren't the same size in this, but they did weigh the same size, that on the weigh-in day when it really matters what size that they are. And so now it just gets totally screwy and it doesn't make any sense. And then if you want to go even deeper, like this is where I started kind of losing it, trying to think about this, was like, well, if all things are equal, yeah, Volkanovski proved himself to be the better fighter, which is why he's still my number one pound for pound fighter. But then it's like, well, him being smaller played some advantage in that fight.
Mhm.
If he's smaller and he's shorter, and it was harder to get in those hips for that takedown.
Mhm.
It's harder to read his punches when he's shorter than you and he has a longer reach. And that angle of the jab coming upward, like that's much harder to see
Mhm.
when he's a smaller guy. So the smaller guy did what he could, and then it just it goes into this never-ending cycle of what ifs, and that leads once again to the lunacy of
Mhm.
pound for pound rankings, because they don't really mean anything.
Yeah.
Well,
It's fun to talk about.
look how good he looked without having to really cut as much weight either. I think that's
Right.
another thing. One fighter had to drain himself to make the weight. The other guy kind of just casually dropped 10 pounds over the last couple of weeks and walked into the cage more natural weight. So the only thing that throws me off also about this rankings is Adesanya still being ahead of Pahea. So if they did weigh the same, they're the same division and they still have
Yeah.
Adesanya ranked ahead of him. So
Yeah,
there
that
everything, nothing makes sense. It's
yeah,
all
none of it makes
opinion,
sense.
and it's just utterly bizarre.
And it'd be one thing if that opinion was at least consistent, like because we know rankings to be a subjective thing, but at least be consistent with it.
Mhm.
Just be consistent. And that way there's some general rule to follow. There's some general guideline that you can point to, or some precedent you can point to and say, okay, that makes sense right now because back then they did it this way too. But when you just start doing it to for whatever reason, like that doesn't make any sense to me. That's where that number one ranking for Volkanovski throws me off.
Mhm.
Because it doesn't align with other times where the head-to-head fight, or even with like you said with Adesanya and Pereira, like that's just
Mhm.
silly. Like that's silly because they were two middleweights. So
Yeah.
And they have a history before the UFC where I know it's
Mhm.
not MMA, but one fighter's dominated the other. So what are we,
yeah, it does
they're not going to have an ADCC grappling match ever in the cage. So we've seen them
Definitely
stand up,
not.
you know.
yeah,
Um,
I've joked about this before, and I'll do it once again because the opportunity has opened up. I want Israel Adesanya to retire from MMA and then decide he's going to like play tennis or something, and I want Alex Pereira to follow him and beat him at Wimbledon. Like that's going to be the next thing. Like like his boogeyman for life.
I feel like I saw a golf meme that kind of did the same thing. Like Adesanya takes up golf and they had Paheda in one of those silly
Yeah, he'll be in the
golf
green
outfits.
jacket, like
Yeah.
looking at him like, yeah, fam, hole in one.
But
another fun little fact about old school MMA is that when Pride first started, for their first 10, 15-ish events, when a fighter had, I think it was a 20-kilogram weight difference, they actually started the fight they didn't really have points, but they
Yeah.
started the fight favored. So
Mm.
if it was a close decision, they would give the fight to Vitor Belfort if he was fighting Gilbert Yvel, or so it's kind and that kind of is playing in the minds of a lot of MMA fans today. Yourself included, myself, if when we talk about who probably is still the number one ranked, we're kind of go handicapping the younger fighter or the smaller weighted fighter. Although in Pride they didn't weigh in at the same weight, which is different. And you were talking massive, some size discrepancies.
And Matt, I'm telling you, you're speaking my language right now, because there's so many things that, and I think this even traces to like the issues that we've talked about in media, where like the old school mentality is still very much a part of the sport, even when it doesn't fit any longer. So like Dana White's been able, and I'm trying to remember who pointed this out, and I can't quite pinpoint it right now who pointed out. It probably is Ben or Jay, since those are the guys I talk to about this the most. But it's like Dana has done a fantastic job of keeping everyone thinking in that old school mentality, like, oh, it's us, the sport, against the entire world, and we need to support the UFC because it's going to support the fighters and blah blah blah. Like that's what's being championed, but that's kind of not what's going on. And people are still kind of riding with that narrative, and it permeates into media and stuff. Also, it's really Ed Doty is the one who said that on my show a couple weeks ago. Yeah, that's who said that. I find that amazing. Like, old school mentality is still very much a part of the sport, no matter how new school it gets in a lot of ways.
So let me ask you guys, just because of, like, as far as, never mind the rankings, because it's all a popularity contest when matches are made, and fighter's stock is better than another's. I mean, whose stock do you think came out better between the two of them? I honestly feel like in losing, Volkanovski's stock seems to have gone up, and the options for him, because he can either do this fight again and sell off another pay-per-view and probably sell more numbers or do better numbers, whatever this one did, or he can go and do and unify the 145 title. So he's like king of the hill right now, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Volkanovski definitely comes out with the biggest boost in stock. So he could stay, and if he stayed at lightweight, even if he doesn't rematch Makhachev right away, like if he can do that to Makhachev, he could do that to a lot of the lightweight division. He can beat a good portion of the lightweight division and a great portion of the top 10. If that's the performance he could put on against the champion. Then, of course, if he stays at 145, the Yair Rodriguez fight is right there. Another double champ fight, even though you can say that belt, the interim belt, is worthless, but still it's on the poster, so we'll count it.
Yeah.
And not to mention the other line of killers that are at 145. Like if Arnold Allen beats Max Holloway, oh man, you telling me that Arnold Allen versus Volkanovski doesn't get you excited? Like there's so many things waiting for him there.
Yeah.
Henry Cejudo could come back and decide he wants to fight at 145, and there you go, another super fight. Like so, and then there was, I think Volkanovski originally wanted to fight at 135, if I'm not mistaken. So if he were able to drop to 135, well, that just opens up another flood of possibility. So he's playing with house money right now.
Yeah.
Makhachev, on the other hand, he got another title defense. We got his first title defense, I should say. He's got the scalp of a pound for pound fighter and a champion in another division. But I think if you're someone else at lightweight right now, you might be watching that fight and licking your chops. Like that aura that Islam has cultivated, since he was knocked out by Adriano Martins. Like, since that moment passed and we all kind of just forgot about it, he's cultivated this air of invincibility, sort of piggybacking off of Khabib's. That's sort of gone now.
Yeah.
And that's a moment that Khabib never had during his title reign or during his time in the UFC period. We saw like that one round where Michael Johnson was able to hit him a few times, and that was kind of it. Like that was the most weakness he ever showed, and Dustin almost had him in a sort of maybe kind of guillotine. That's it. We didn't have 5 questionable rounds
Mhm.
of Khabib getting out grappled in certain spots and getting outstruck and getting stalled out and getting out positioned and getting beaten in scrambles. We didn't have that with Khabib at all, like ever. So that aura of invincibility that Makhachev cultivated as a champion, like it's kind of gone now, and
Mhm.
he can reclaim it. But there's going to be at least one fighter in a training camp right
Mhm.
now who doesn't believe that he's invincible, who doesn't have that in the back of his mind, and he's going to be training accordingly,
Mhm.
watching what Volkanovski did, and hoping he can replicate some parts of it to his own success with a heavier punch and
Oh
more
yeah.
power, and yeah,
Yeah,
whatever other tools are offered.
yeah. I mean, Khabib did have the Gleison Tebow fight early on where it wasn't great. Um, but that was early on in his run, and it was still a unanimous decision, despite some people questioning it a little bit back then. I have a little bit different take on this. While I think immediately right now Volkanovski seems like he's the winner in this situation, I also think his next fight he has more pressure on him than he's ever had before because he can't lose. Like you can't have 2 losses in a row. Like so he's his is a must win fight. Volkanovski and Islam on the other hand, let's also keep in mind if Islam
Mhm.
signs to fight in 2 weeks, all of a sudden he's going to be the number 1 pound for pound fighter in the
Oh,
world.
of course, yeah.
Like while it's 1 and 2, it's really just kind of whoever fights next is going to get that crowning. Um, and I mean, as a historian of the sport, I think when we talk about the TikTok and week by week generation of fandom and news cycle, when the history books are written, he's beaten the 1 and the 3 pound for pound ranked fighters in a matter of months.
Mhm.
So like while his stock might be down slightly for this week, I think that if he rebounds, and it was his first 5 round fight that so and not an easy opponent for a first 5 round fight, although a weight division down. Um, I feel like he has ability to learn from. I think there's a lot for him to learn from this fight, whereas Volkanovski really just kind of did his thing, and maybe there's not much improvement for Volkanovski. Like, what would you improve on him? Whereas Islam, you go, okay, you got to get your cardio's got to get up a little bit. Your striking looked great. We didn't expect that out of you, so keep that going. He kind of dropped Volkanovski, but he dropped Oliveira. So his stand up is getting there. We know his wrestling's solid. Maybe it was kind of an off night. Like I feel like we got to see another fight for him just to go. Like, was Volkanovski on his game, and was Islam just at like 85%? So
Mhm.
maybe that's enough to make up that division. But for me, the history books, when you
Mhm.
look at the resumes now, the resume still shows an L next to Volkanovski. So when people, and fans are fickle. When we look,
Mhm.
they look back at fans records of fighters years ago and go, oh well, that guy was a bum. Look, he has an L. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
I feel like while Volkanovski's hot this week, I don't think either fighter really took a blow
Mhm.
to their image. And I think they both the next fight is kind of going to be the one that really lays the table for where these guys are historically, because obviously if Islam comes out and lays an egg and loses to his next
Mhm.
fight, then everybody's going to go, yeah, Volkanovski was Volkanovski was his kryptonite and he never recovered from that.
Mhm.
We had that with Fedor, we had that with John Jones. Those guys, it's like, well, the guys they fought were bums because they went on losing streaks after they fought Fedor. It's like, no, the reason they kind of were damaged is because they fought Fedor and they fought
Hmm.
Yeah.
John Jones. They took years off their career and they beat them up. They hurt these people, and
Yeah.
they never were quite the same ever again. So I think it really worked out well for both of them, and I think the UFC PR machine is just gonna. It doesn't matter. Like you said, we joke about John Jones. John Jones is going to be
Hmm.
miraculously the 3 days before that fight, he's going to be number 1, and Gon's going to end up slipping into like the 7 or 8 spot. You know, and whoever
Mhm.
wins that fight is all of a sudden, if Gon wins, he's all of a sudden going to be 3. If
Mhm.
Jones wins, he's going to come out of nowhere and be 1. And so I think it was one of those fights where we got kind of it was a rare situation where we got what we wanted. Everybody, it was a great fight. I
Yeah.
really don't see a whole
Hmm.
lot of loss. But for the history books, I'd rather be Islam. I'd rather be looking at that win, those back-to-back wins in my resume when I retire, or my tombstone's made for MMA.
Mm.
That's two beautiful wins back to back, and I think he deserves credit for taking those fights. He was taking a fight in a smaller guy, but it's still a risk. It was kind of a no-win, and we're seeing that even more now. Because initially we thought, oh, it's going to be for number one. Well, he's kind of getting bashed, but he won the fight on 75%. I know, Ant, you had it scored the other way, but
but that's a reasonable score. Like,
but it's reasonable, 3-2,
yeah.
and like you said, you had the round where he had his back the whole time, but Volkanovski was punching him. So do we, you know what I mean? So I just thought it was a great fight, and I look forward to actually their next fight to really kind of figure out this chapter of their careers.
So I honestly think we're gonna see of Islam and Volkanovski again before we see Volkanovski against Yair, just because Yair is probably going to be laid up with an injury or put this thing off until 2024 or something like that. And Volkanovski obviously wants to keep going. I feel like we're going to see that before we see we're going to see Islam and Volkanovski before we see Yair. What do you think, Ant?
I certainly hope that's not the case. Like, I'm so tired of immediate rematches. I want this to be. I want them to not sort of blow the wad like they did with Kane and JDS. Like to put together this trilogy just fast, and like this huge chunk of their careers they only saw each other and Bigfoot Silva. Now, that was it for Kane. Like that's just not good. Like it deprives us of so much more. Yair put on his most complete performance in the co-main event. They threw a damn belt around the guy's waist. Let's pretend like it means something and let him have a chance to unify. And Makhachev has a line of killers at 155 that are waiting to get at him. So let them have at least one or two fights, and then we can start talking about bringing them back together. Like, and if the circumstances present themselves, because say Yair goes out there, shocks the world, head kicks Volkanovski to death. And then what? You mean
breaks his foot when he does it?
Yeah, if Yair decides like after that, that's very, very likely to happen. And not only because Yair gets injured a lot, but because like Volkanovski looked like he got one of those bullet heads, like Evander Holyfield heads, where like you touch it and you're gonna break something.
Yeah.
Like, but like say Yair does that and he decides, you know what, I'm gonna eat a couple double cheeseburgers and I want to fight the champ at 155. Yeah, sign me up. I'm down for that.
Yeah.
It's so many more possibilities are open. And then let's not forget too. This is what I think is actually going to happen here. I think Islam is going to fight Conor McGregor. That's what's going to happen. When McGregor and Chandler fight each other, if McGregor beats him, especially if Chandler comes out there fighting like a knucklehead and forgets that he can wrestle, which he seemed to have forgotten in the UFC. He just forgot like that he's like this world-class wrestler.
Yeah. He goes run into people.
Yeah, he wants to go run out there with his chin out and just start swinging wildly. And McGregor is even a sliver of what he used to be. He'll cold cock him. That'll be that. And then all of a sudden, McGregor is your number one contender at lightweight. And then we get like the caffeine-free version of Khabib Conor 2.
That's 5 rounds of him getting drugged around the cage again.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's the same. That's probably what's going to happen. But no matter what the results of that fight be, that's what the UFC's got to want, right? Like that's like so much money. You get. Khabib might jump up off the couch and say, you know what, let me try this coaching thing again because I want to see this guy get pounded into sand yet again.
Yeah.
And then you've got this mega promotion backing this mega fight, and then we can start the whole parade again. Like that's probably what's going to happen. And it sucks, but that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, you mentioned Yair there in his fight. My thing, his performance aside, like. I felt like we kind of watched him grow up a little bit in the cage. I feel like he kind of has a history of some childish stuff and but I really appreciated his attitude towards Emmett. I mean, as again an old school fan who's more about the Bushido style of fighting, I really appreciated his post fight, his interview, everything about it. To me, kind of made me a fan again, because I was a fan of his when he first came in. He's flashy, he's fun as hell to watch, but you kind of were like, okay, he's kind of a punk. Like this, maybe he's kind of going down a route where things aren't going to be as he's not going to appeal to me. I know that it appeals to a lot, but so I just want to give him props for just acting like a champion, and I thought that was was cool of him.
Yeah, he definitely leveled up, and I think it matches with the complete performance he showed against Emmett. Like every threat that Emmett posed, he had a very clear answer for. And then not only did he have an answer for it, he had an answer for it in his own style. It wasn't like he said, okay, now I'm gonna outbox Josh Emmett. I'm gonna, and I'm just gonna be super slick and I'm gonna outbox him. He didn't do that. He didn't say, okay, this guy with these wrestling credentials is gonna try to take me down. You know what? I'm gonna bring in the toughest wrestlers I can into my camp, and I'm just gonna wrestle, and I'm gonna single leg him just to show that I can do it. He didn't do anything like that. He looked at his style. What he likes to do, and how can I alter that to match what my opponent is going to give me? And that was just it just made everything come together. It made everything fall right into line. And it also, he wasn't married to the idea of landing something flashy. A very simple switch kick to the liver was the bread and butter of that whole fight. And he kept landing it. Okay, this is working. Okay, I don't have to get fancy. Just do it again. Oh, it worked again. I don't have to get fancy. Just do it again. Rinse and repeat.
And then kind of flashes of old Anderson Silva in a sense that, like, he had the crisp striking, and when he was taken down, he used those elbows real hard to the head, was super aggressive, didn't allow anybody to sleep in his guard. And then when he caught him off guard in his guard, he threw up the triangle. I mean, not comparing him, but like there was that little bit of like flashes, like maybe his loss to Edgar, and maybe that's the Takase loss, and like for Silva, like maybe we're watching something that could really develop into a superhero almost of mixed martial arts. Because I mean, that flash that he provides is special. There's very, very few people that can do that. And that's what the younger generation, I mean, you want to talk about keeping kids involved and wanting the 10-year-olds to get into it.
That's the guy you gotta watch.
That's the guy.
That's the one who's gonna get your son to say, hey, I want to go to this taekwondo school. Like that's what's gonna do it. It's watching someone like him. What I was most impressed by was how he would land the kick and then throw a punch right after with his legs still in the air. Because that's something that, like, you practice on the bag a lot. You might practice in drills and stuff like that, but you don't see it in actual combat situations too often. But it's such a good answer for someone who's just gonna charge for it with hard counter punches, like Emmett was definitely going to do against Yair. Because a lot of other people, what's up?
No, I'm sorry. He took that liver shot. One of those liver shots that Emmett took, like you saw him.
It looked like he aged 10 years after one of those.
But the fact that he didn't drop after that one, first or second one, that made him cringe, I was just like, yo, that's a tough dude. Yeah.
But someone like that, like, they're gonna bite down on their mouth guard and they're gonna come at you and just gonna swing as hard as possible. So especially you put a guy who thinks like that against this flashy kicker. And he's probably thinking, man, I'm going to catch that kick and I'm going to put his lights out. And so that's exactly what, if Emmett tried to drill everything but doing that, that's exactly who he would have done, just because that's who he is, right? But instead of Yair just avoiding the situation altogether and just saying, okay, I'm going to rely on my hands because I don't want to get my kick caught, I'm going to throw this kick anyway. He's going to accept whatever is on the other end of this kick. And the moment he tries to load up, I'm just going to pop him one good time. And he did everything he could after that kick to stop Emmett from building up his rhythm. And it was fantastic. And it played exactly into what Emmett offers. And it didn't require Yair to add these new layers to his game that aren't naturally him. So I thought it was fantastic. That was by far my favorite part of what he did.
Listen, he always puts on a good performance when he fights. I just hate that every time he he does so well, he like disappears for a long time for a Mexican fighter. And as a Mexican person that likes fighting, it aggravates me.
It's
It
not his
aggravates
fault though. When he was dodging USADA, he just didn't realize he just had to tell him I don't want to get drug tested, and it was okay. Like
just put in your
McGregor.
retirement papers.
Just
It's
you
all
don't
good.
have to retire. Just be McGregor and tell him you want a 6-8
Yeah.
month break from drug testing.
Yeah, I'm on a yacht. You can't find me.
So, well, I mean, we're already going overtime with the hour. So, and I'm so glad you made it on this podcast because again, we've been trying to get you on here. We've had Jay, we've had Ben on here in the past, so it's nice to finally get the trifecta. Can you just let folks know where they can follow you, your work, the podcast, and everything you do?
Oh, of course. So, of course, my Twitter handle at Ant Walker MMA. You can catch me on there. Just my opinions on fights, on hip hop, on whatever I feel like at the time. And I'm a man with diverse tastes, and I think of a lot of random things. So you can even see a picture of the medium rare steak I cooked last night. So that's it's probably one of my prouder accomplishments with the bacon wrapped shrimp that I did myself. So I'm very proud of that. I'm going to poke my chest out when I walk out this room just to remind my wife that, yes, I did that. But anyway, other than that, you can catch my work on MMA On Point and, of course, the Living Death Show on the Walkout Network. I do also, for some of the pay-per-views, me and Dan Tom of MMA Junkie, we do an alternate commentary track for the top 2 or 3 fights on the card. So we'll be doing that from time to time. So, watch our Twitter feeds for info about upcoming times that we get together to discuss this stuff.
Fans that are interested in combat events for this weekend, really quick, BKFC Knucklemania 3 Friday. Hell of a main event. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but Lorenzo Hunt versus Mike the Marine Richmond. Good unifying 2 championship fight. Diego Sanchez on the card, John Dodson on the card. Should be a good event if you're into blood and guts and bare knuckle fighting. And then, of course, UFC late replacement Jessica Andrade steps in to fight Aaron Blanchfield, which should be a hell of a main event for a fight night card at the waist of an Apex.
What a garbage card overall, though.
yeah, but it's a nice main event though. At this point, when they're on,
there's some regional MMA Lights Out Championship 10. If you guys, if folks want to sign up for Spectation Sports, one of the places I contribute to, there's some regional MMA going on there too. I spoke with Reese Brink, who's on the Lights Out 10 card, and that dude lit a fire under my ass to go train last night before I went to teach my class. So there's stuff to watch.
Sean Merriman's promotion?
No, it's funny. That's Lights Out Championship. Sean Merriman's Lights Out Extreme.
I was about to say, because like that's out here. Like I'm like, oh man, I got something to do this weekend. I'll try to go to that. But all right. Well, hey, sorry, I'm disappointed. Can't
that's
go. That's
all right. Yeah, I think he's doing March though. He's got something going mid-March.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me get some tickets for that. Yeah.
All right, fans can check out the show at Combat Hour on Twitter, Coast-to-Coast Combat Hour on Instagram. Follow me, Matthew Hawkins, at MMA Hawk 21 on Twitter and Instagram. Follow Ed at Carbazol on Twitter, Carbeerzol on Instagram, and Old Head Carb on Twitch. And as always, you can check out our video podcast at allaccessmma.com. Check out allaccessmma.com for our video podcast, MMA news, and MMA stories. I'm going to go jump in my Burgundy 300 on 22s and go listen to a little Quick is the name to build up my street cred. So next time Anthony wants to talk hip-hop with me. But thank you for listening to everybody, and have a good night, and enjoy the fights this weekend.